Thank you, George. And thank you, Sangha Live, as always. I've always enjoyed teaching in this format. I also appreciate that I can go upstairs and teach from my house without having to get on airplanes or drive or anything like that. So this is actually pretty good. Pretty good we get to meet like this. So the session will go as follows. I'll just kind of do a brief introduction of the topic, and then we'll do a practice, a guided practice that will hopefully correlate with the teaching session. And then I'll talk for a bit about that, and then we can have some discussion or some questions and perhaps some answers. We'll see how that goes. And so the topic, I believe, is genuine happiness, although I'm kind of leaning more into the word authentic happiness. But that's okay. I'll talk more about what I mean by that. And so to just give you a sense of that is happiness is kind of, just want to say one thing about it from the perspective of Dharma practices. Happiness is a skill. Happiness is not a state. And so people who get into meditation, I see this all the time, they get into meditation or vipassana, mindfulness, and you become what's called state chasing. You think you're going to meditate, and then someday you're going to snap into some state. We could call that enlightenment. We should probably not use that word anymore, but that's a whole other conversation. And then on the other side of that event, everything is just going to be easy and no problem. And so we want to be careful that we don't think that the goal of practice is to develop a state of mind. That's certainly part of it, but the goal is what we're looking for actually is long-term behavioral change. The way that we relate to ourselves and the way that we relate to the world, which is really trait. So again, happiness isn't a state, it's a skill, and it's something that we develop over time, and we have a huge system called the Eightfold Path, how to do that, so on and so forth. Now, a lot of the, not a lot of, but probably a good portion of the material I will use today comes from secular research around happiness, and some of the things that they've found, people living in the modern world, some kind of constituents of happiness, which are contentment, meaning, and purpose. And so I'll kind of talk about the three of those things, because I think most of us are after that kind of stuff. Most people hear contentment, meaning, and purpose, and we think that sounds pretty good. Where do I get that? It's again, these are skills. These are not states. They're not things that you purchase in the marketplace. They're qualities that you develop through your own labor, through your own work, through your own effort. And so the practice that we'll do will be just focusing on the first one, contentment. I don't know how many of you are over here in the U.S., and congratulations for those of you who caught the time change. George and I got on at the same time today. I was happy to see that. Contentment over here in the States, at least, sometimes is also not something that people necessarily strive for. Contentment sometimes can sort of feel like you've sort of given up, or you've kind of rest assured, or you've kind of settled. And so contentment in American culture is not something that necessarily gets high praise, and I think that that's a problem. And I won't go too far down this rabbit hole, but I will say in our capitalistic society, the last thing big corporations in capitalistic society wants is a population of content people. That is not what they're looking for. And if you pay any attention to what goes on over here, you find that they have succeeded because they do not have a population of content people. They have developed a population of divisiveness and discontented and, kind of unhappy people who spend money on things they don't need to impress people they don't like. And so this is kind of the situation that we find ourselves in over here, at least. And so I think there's a rebellion here that's being asked. I think the Buddha was definitely a rebel. As much as we can praise and think about the Buddha, we have to realize that in the historical context, the Buddha was not liked by much of the people in his culture and his society. A lot of people didn't like what he was up to. He was trying to put aside the caste system and racism. He was letting women into the Sangha. He was doing a lot of stuff that was not a lot of people were happy about. So he was kind of a rebel in his own right. Sometimes he's referred to as the rebel saint. And so I think there's something actually rebellious about being content. And that is really kind of, I think, skill numero uno when we develop something like mindfulness, or we sit quietly. Can you sit quietly, close your eyes, and feel truly content? I would probably assume that by and large, much of the time, you find that you're not actually able to do that. And so we get into this craving and aversion dynamic. I want this and I don't want this, and I want that and I don't want that, and if I get this I'll be happy, and if I avoid that I'll be happy. And so that's kind of the pillar, the metric of happiness is if you get what you want and you avoid what you don't want. If you could somehow achieve that impossible task, you would be happy. So contentment is a state of mind. It's actually one of the 7 awakening factors. It's in Pali, it's pasati, which usually translates as tranquility, which I think is a kind of not such a wonderful translation because I don't use the word tranquility. And so it's a sense of contentment. It's one of the 7 factors of awakening, which is the mind that is present, the mind that is steady, the mind that is open, and the mind that is truly well. And 17th century French philosopher Blaise Pascal, who has many great quotes, one of his best quotes is, all human misery stems from the fact that you can't sit quietly in a room by yourself. Right? And so when we practice mindfulness, when we practice Dharma, I think we always have to bear in mind one of the things that we're trying to develop is a kind of contentment. Renunciation. I don't need anything right now. I don't need to add anything to my experience. I don't need to subtract anything from my experience. I'm good, good enough. And so I think that we sometimes forget that this is really such an important feature of the practice, and it contributes to everything else that we do. So we will do a practice of that. But to also just kind of add into that a kind of plug for this Buddhist practice that doesn't always get the attention it deserves, sila, sometimes translated as ethics or integrity, which is one of the dimensions of the path. And that actually for us, for a lot of us, there's a lot of contentment and happiness that comes from being a good person, from living a good life, from having a sense of integrity. So we'll kind of use that metric. I don't think that gets included because most people think, again, with the state chasing, when we practice meditation, if I have a disagreeable state of mind, that's somehow a problem, and then we kind of go to war against that. And we maybe don't acknowledge all of the other good things that we do, our honesty, our sense of integrity, our sense of maybe trying to create positive change in the world, the good things that you're already doing, that you're actually not tracking. Because I don't know if you've noticed, but not everybody's trying to be good. Not everybody's out there every day trying to create positive change in the world. That's not a huge segment of the population, unfortunately. So we'll practice for about maybe 25 minutes or so. So you can please find a comfortable way to sit, upright posture, feel sustainable for some time. And you can leave your screen on or off. I will leave mine on. And we will start and end with the sound of the bell. So beginning by bringing your full awareness into the present time experience, mindfulness, starting by pouring your mind into your body. So just pouring the mind. Many of us experience that at the head. So pouring that down, filling the whole body full of awareness. As you tune into the body to just get a sense of how the body feels And temperature, comfort, do you feel warm? Do you feel cool? Getting a sense of the gravity of the body, heaviness, pressure, down pressure, the bones being pulled down into the chair, down into the earth. Breathing, tuning into the sensations of the in-breath, and seeing if you can sustain your attention all the way through the full length of the in-breath, breathing in, breathing out, sustaining your attention with the full length of the out-breath, breathing out. And then all of us here for the next few minutes, all together, practicing in unison. This mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of breathing, and connecting to the fullness of that experience. Connecting and sustaining with the body here in the present moment, expanding to include feeling, the felt sense, tuning into the body, acknowledging the range of comfort, areas in the body that feel pleasing, comfortable, content, areas of the body where there might be a bit of discomfort, restlessness, or tiredness. Areas of the body where there's kind of neither. It's just there, doesn't have a strong valence or tone. So this sitting, feeling, breathing body And then opening to the mind state, the state of the mind, attitude of mind, thoughts, ideas, past, future, self, other. All of these ideas that emerge here in the present time, just letting them come and go as you get a sense of the mind stream and its content. Not trying to add anything or subtract anything, just allowing it to be there. And then bringing mindfulness to the heart center area, expanding the awareness from the tip of your chin down through the neck and throat, letting go of any tension or tightness in that area, softening. Feeling the chest rise and fall as you breathe in and out, rising, falling, softening the belly. And just softening, relaxing as best you can the whole area from the chin down to the belly button and back up. And then feeling into this area to the heart space. And just seeing if you can recognize or acknowledge your own deep wish, your own desire to be at ease, to be content in this moment just as it is. To truly be okay, to truly be well with things just as they are right now. To bring a heartfelt attitude of good enough, whatever's happening, good enough. No troubles, no problems, nothing to affix, nothing to avoid. I'm good enough just the way I am here now. And tuning into that quality of well-being, of goodness, contentment. This quality that is already here anyway. And for the last 5 minutes, to just see if we can cultivate, establish, and just allow the mind and heart to rest in this quality of contentment, untroubledness, nothing to fix, nothing to solve, nothing to have, nothing to be rid of. Just an authentic relationship with your experience just as it is. Whilst acknowledging your wish, desire to be at ease, to be content, to be free. See if you can just simply be that for now. All right, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever the case may be. Um, I suspect my audio and video are acceptable. Okay, good. That certainly helps. So, talking a little bit about the theme, genuine happiness. Probably, if I retitle it, would be genuine happiness slash authentic happiness. And so, just in kind of a language sense, genuine oftentimes refers to a person's honest and sincere ways of relating to other people and what other people may see in that person. So when somebody's genuine, it's usually about how we perceive somebody. Well, that person's a genuine person. Authenticity, interestingly enough, usually refers to how the person relates to themselves, how I see myself in my own eyes. Now, this also too correlates to two very interesting Pali terms called hiri and ottappa, which are usually translated poorly as shame and moral dread. But hiri is how I see myself in my own eyes, and can I develop an authentic relationship with that? And then how other people experience me in kind of a sense of genuine. And so this is happiness, again, not being a state, happiness not being about getting what you want and avoiding what you don't want, and kind of all of that way that the superficial societies and cultures think about happiness, but a happiness really of being, a kind of really internal happiness. And I really like this word authentic. I think it's kind of a bit of a buzzword. So I've been looking at what other people have said about it. And it's really where it sits in great detail is in the work of the existential philosophers Kierkegaard, Sartre, Camus. And interestingly enough, Kierkegaard, who was a sort of a Christian existentialist, in his book, The Sickness Unto Death, he actually describes inauthenticity. So sometimes it's better to look at the opposite. What is inauthenticity? What does it mean to live an inauthentic life? And he says, he describes inauthenticity in terms of fleeing from ourselves, not wanting to be oneself. Have you ever had the thought or the experience of not wanting to be oneself? Or wanting to be rid of oneself? Insofar as we let other people decide our lives for us, we live a life that is bereft of joy, contentment, meaning, and purpose. So that might raise the bar a little bit. I don't want any of that. And I've had plenty of it. And so how does this how do we posit this towards Dharma practice? And so I wrote this in a description, as I think this is safe to say, this has certainly been my experience. I suspect it's been yours on some level, is that there's definitely, I feel, an unnecessary or overwhelming emphasis placed on suffering, or dukkha, in the Buddhist tradition. And sometimes we can get stuck there. I know I was stuck there for decades. And so, trying to end this dukkha thing, which I think is kind of a bad move. And so, this is the first noble truth. The Buddha starts with this kind of, very kind of poignant existential explanation, that we were born, we're going to get sick, we get old, we die, we don't always get what we want. Sometimes we get what we don't want. Everything we love and everything that's dear to us, we will lose. And in the end, we lose it all. It's all going down. We all know where all this ship is headed. Yet we pretend and we're in denial, and we do all these strange things to kind of not want to deal with that, which is kind of an inauthentic move. And this practice that Stephen Levine has, if some of you might have known this practice, a year to live, where you take a whole year to kind of imagine it with if you knew it was your last year to live, I bet you do things differently starting probably right away. And so, how do we kind of sit with this existential reality that he talks about, this dukkha experience? And so that's a big dimension of the practice. And so we find this in our present moment experience. We find this in the body. We find this in the four foundations of mindfulness. How do we come to have an authentic relationship with that? And so when you look at the pillars of happiness, this comes from sort of happiness research. I always jokingly say this, but it's true. If I could go back and do it again, I would become a happiness researcher, because that sounds like a great job. And so Greater Good Science Center, different other places. There's been a lot of people there's a lot of data that's been studied about genuine or authentic happiness. And really the pillars of that are contentment, which I've talked about. And I think in many ways, the practice of meditation, the cultivation of present time awareness, the contemplative training of the entire Buddhist endeavor is really at its core about contentment. Can I just be okay, good enough? Can I be here without wanting to be rid of myself or wanting myself to be different? And all these kinds of hindrances that we wrestle with. Contentment, purpose, having a reason to get out of bed in the morning. A purposefulness, a kind of a wanting to make a contribution to the world in a way that feels like it has some purpose, like it's something that's worthwhile, and a sense of meaning. Having a meaningful life, having a meaningful experience, doing things that mean or matter to us. Now, if you map these over, this is interesting. When you look at happiness as it correlates to feeling, so this word you're probably all familiar with, the second foundation of mindfulness, Vedana, translated as feeling, pretty good translation. The felt sense, some psychotherapy practices use that, which I think is a good word, the felt sense. And we kind of have pleasure, pain, and this kind of thing in the middle we could probably call neutral. And so these really map over that. So when we look at neutrality, let's just kind of look at that middle zone. The indifference, the ambiguity, the neither, technically is what it is. It's neither. It's not pleasurable. It's not painful. It's this other thing. And so what we really want to develop with that kind of relationship is a quality of contentment. When things are neither, when things are kind of neutral, do you feel content or do you feel bored? When things are neither, do you feel content or do you feel bored or do you feel agitated or kind of what's the point? And a lot of times, if this goes unnoticed, if we let the kind of destructive mind wandering that can happen in these ambiguous feeling tones take over, this is where we wander into despair in its worst case scenario. Which is the way Kierkegaard talks about sin, actually, where Kierkegaard is actually more of a Buddhist than a Christian, it turns out. We kind of wander into these destructive territories. What's the point? It's all just a big nothing. It's all, you've probably been there. I've been there. You ever just been sitting around one day with nothing to do, twiddling your thumbs, thinking, oh man, what's the point of all this anyway? It's all just a big disappointment and aggravation for me, right? So that's not good. And so what we want to try to do, and this is actually the Satipatthana mindfulness theory on this, which I think is a good theory. And what they say is that when things are neither, when things are neutral, and there's mindfulness, if there's mindfulness of that quality, it becomes pleasant. It becomes deeply content. It becomes enjoyable. It becomes easeful. If there's not mindfulness, micchasati, if you're not mindful, it becomes unpleasant. Becomes boring, it becomes despairing. So what I always try to tell people is make sure you occupy the neutral zone. Because if you occupy that neutral zone, you're changing the math to 66% versus 33%. Like it's way in your favor. And so, and this is also the other word that they use for this neutrality thing is equanimity, upekkha, which actually is a word for that. There's that kind of, that evenness of mind, that steadiness of mind. So when we try to develop happiness with feeling, we really have to try to have more contentment towards neutrality. Now, purpose is really about pleasant feelings. Purpose is about waking up in the morning and having a reason to get out of bed, having something to look forward to, which is kind of a very simple definition of purpose. And we do need to have this. We do have to put some effort into this, making sure we have something that we feel is worthwhile to even do. This kind of, and finding pleasantness in that, agreeable in that, enjoyment in that. I do things that are purposeful to me because I feel like it's in line with my values. I feel like it's worthwhile. I'm going to do this thing. And you all can think of examples of this. And to live without this is not so good. To be discontented and have no direction or sense of purpose, this is where things like addiction fall under people. Meaninglessness, people get isolated, they get in destructive relationships with a whole range of things. This is not a healthy state for us to linger in. But you have to do some work, you're not just going to slip on a banana peel and start doing this stuff. Requires kind of contemplative training, requires direction, requires mindfulness. We have to be involved in our lives. Now, meaning, on the other hand, this is very interesting if you look at the secular research on meaning. Now, if you look at, for example, I'll use somebody who's very popular. Probably many of you know or are familiar with the work of Brene Brown, who's written many, many books. She has podcasts. She kind of entered the arena on this vulnerability talk she did many years ago, followed up by a talk on shame. Who would ever thought you'd become famous by talking about shame and vulnerability? But she has done it, probably because many people struggle with these two things. And she's done all this kind of, she's a qualitative researcher, so she reads stories and tries to extract. And so she did a lot of research on people going to people saying, tell me a story about something meaningful in your life. And she did 25,000 people, something like this, huge study. And so when people talk about something meaningful in their life, something that was meaningful, that changed the course of their life, that had them question things deeper, maybe they made some hard choices, they did something difficult. Not always, but by and large, most people, when they tell a story about something that was deeply meaningful, it starts by telling a story of something they went through that was totally painful. Really painful. Suffering, loss, tragedy, trauma. And this isn't every case. Some people have meaningful stories about things, but the overwhelming percentage of people who, when they talk about meaning, they talk about pain. They talk about dukkha. They talk about suffering. They talk about loss. They talk about hardship. They talk about disconnection. They talk about all the stuff that we sort of don't want to talk about, but they talk about it as not being good or important, but just about being necessary. And this is really, I think, when you think about Four Noble Truths as tasks, as things to do, rather than things to believe in, which I think is probably more in line with the original message. The Buddha's request is, to embrace that, to come to understand that, to occupy your painfulness, to occupy what's been hard for you, which is also a very authentic move to make. It's a very authentic way to live, to really own your pain. Anybody who's ever been to a 12-step meeting or saw somebody tell their story from the front of the room, you see this. It's a very authentic thing to do, and it's not something that happens all over the place. So really, when we look at neutrality, we really want to be in touch with the fullness of our experience. We really want to embrace that which has been difficult, because it will be helpful to us. It will help us be more authentic. It will help us guide our life in a way where we're in touch with all of it. Now, the other thing that's I think baked into the problem with all this is, and this is why I have an organization called the Secular Dharma Foundation to try to tackle some of this, is that, as I'm sure most of you know, all of you know, that for the most part, Buddhism, Dharma, Buddhism has come down from a monastic tradition for 2,500 years. And for the most part, people who aren't monastic, lay people, secular people, people living in contemporary society, householders, whatever word you want to use, for the most part, didn't really have a Dharma practice. They kind of would support the monks and the nuns. And so many of us, probably many of you, this kind of little experiment has been going on for maybe 50 years, when all these practices came over here. And so some of us are trying to navigate, like, well, how do you do this, right? Like, how do you actually wake up every day, go out into the world that you have with your families and your friends and work and all of the kind of secular dukkha of the world, all the bullshit, let's be honest, that we have to deal with every day. How do you actually go at that stuff with some degree of, from a contemplative practice standpoint, rather than just thinking, oh, this is all the aggravation and all the disappointment I have to deal with, and when I'm done dealing with it, then I'll get back to sitting on a cushion. Right? That's a bad spot, and there's actually no template for this. There's no, there's no map. Nobody's really done this. This is kind of like what we're trying to do, and I would imagine, like me, you're struggling and kind of finding like you're having to keep your balance with all of it for a good reason. And so one of the things that I think is important to acknowledge is that most of us, myself included, we need to try to find balance between hedonic pleasure and what we would call happiness of being. Now, by and large, the monastic tradition, they've kind of put aside the hedonic happiness, hedonic pleasure. They don't eat food past noon. They don't have sex. They don't deal with money. They don't deal with a lot of the stuff that I suspect you all deal with all day, every day. And so we can kind of get on this like really destructive high horse that I've been on, and I suggest you stay off of it, where like we think that if we're good practitioners, that we just shouldn't want anything. Right? That wanting anything at all is kind of clinging and craving and causes the suffering. And we get into this kind of really awkward psychological experiment that I can tell you will get you nowhere, because I've done it. And so we also want to realize that there is happiness in going out to lunch with a friend. Maybe there's happiness in a new pair of shoes. There's happiness in the hedonic world, and we are choosing to participate with that. And so we should. And I want to read the sutta because I think the Buddha talks about this actually. And this is a sutta, it's very short, I'll read it. It's called The Gratification, the Danger, and the Escape. The version I'm going to pull from, you can get in that purple book by Bhikkhu Bodhi, In the Buddha's Words, if you have that one. It's called The Gratification, the Danger, and the Escape. And this is interesting. I'll just add a footnote. Many academics of the early discourses, kind of Pali scholars, a lot of people think there's a lot of assumption that this teaching of the gratification, the danger, and the escape were probably the original ideas that would have formulated what we now know as the Four Noble Truths. So these are some early ideas the Buddha had that probably ended up arriving in the Four Noble Truths, which many people understand, or we get told that this was the first discourse that the Buddha ever gave. But historically, in historical context, would probably say that that's not true. He probably didn't formulate the ideas of the Four Noble Truths till maybe halfway through his teaching career. So the idea that it was the first thing out of the man's mouth is probably just not true. So that's interesting because we hear this. And so these are ideas. And so this is the Buddha reflecting on, he's kind of talking to himself. And he says, and he talks about before he was awake. He says, practitioners, before my awakening, when I was still an untrained worldling. I love this word, by the way, untrained worldlings. Have you encountered any of these untrained worldlings lately? They're everywhere, right? He says, when I was still an untrained worldling, not yet fully awake, it occurred to me, what is the gratification, what is the danger, and what is the escape in this world? Then, practitioners, it occurred to me, the pleasure, the joy, and excitement that arise independence upon pleasing conditions. This is the gratification in the world. So a lot of times with this dukkha business, this kind of unsatisfactoriness, we kind of get into this kind of really kind of nihilistic, I think, destructive thinking that it's all just unsatisfactoriness and it's all just a big nothing and there's nothing to even worth going after. That's not what he's saying here. He's saying there is gratification in the world. There's actually plenty of it. And anything that brings pleasure, that brings joy, that brings excitement, anything that brings us that sense is the gratification in the world. And so he's not talking about it in the pejorative. He's just saying, yeah, there's actually happiness to be had in going out to lunch with a friend, and getting a new job, getting a new car, getting a house, having children, like all the stuff that you do. And I mean, don't you sometimes feel happy when you get some new stuff? I do. Like I do, and like I don't think we should poo-poo that. I think that that's totally appropriate, right? That we don't live in a monastery, and that we should find joy and happiness in these things. Otherwise, it's going to be kind of a dismal existence to just think it's all unsatisfying. It's not. There's plenty of stuff out there that brings us gratification. However, he goes on to say that this gratification is impermanent, unreliable, and subject to change. This is the danger in the world. So he doesn't say that pleasure and joy and new sneakers and new cars and all that stuff. He's not saying it's bad or wrong. He's just saying it's dangerous, right? So be careful that, and so that it's dangerous because we can become so preoccupied that our entire direction of our life becomes trying to acquire that, which we see in American culture on steroids all the time. So again, it's not that it's bad or wrong or that it's, anti-Buddhist. The Buddhist saying, yeah, it's out there, but you be careful because it's dangerous. And then he says, the recognition the removal and abandonment of craving and greed and lust for this gratification. This is the escape from the world. The world, I know it's kind of a wonky term, the world meaning that which is really out there. You know, you have your life that you live and you kind of walk around your world, but this idea that we all share, that there's this world out there, which maybe there even isn't. I don't even know if I buy into this anymore. The world, that which is really out there, you know, that you get all the information on your little screen from. I don't know. Maybe it's all just a bunch of matrix shit. I don't know. Is there a world out there? I don't know. I hear about it. I hear lots of terrible things about it lately. I'm not so sure this buying into the world that is really out there is such a good move, but we'll put that aside. But he's talking about it's the craving and it's the attachment and it's the greed and it's the lust. It's the I need the external thing to be happy. So it actually puts us in a bit more of an awkward position as humans because, and this comes from the work I've done with my friend Eve Ekman around cultivating emotional balance, is that our job, if you want to see it this way, is to actually find a balance, a happy balance between hedonic pleasure and inner cultivation, or what we might call happiness of being. So it's this kind of dance. And so what really helps with that, of course, is renunciation, right? You know, there's nothing wrong with going out to lunch, but do I need to go out to lunch every day? Do I need 15 pairs of Vans? Do I need, you know, maybe I can enjoy the gratification of the world, but maybe I don't need as much as I think, or maybe I can practice some renunciation and see there's actually joy in letting go and joy of having less. Now, again, this renunciation word you don't see spray painted everywhere because it's not good for capitalism. Okay. You know, this is not something you're going to hear about. This is why it's an ancient tradition. And so there's a balance. So there's a way in which we actually can find the middle way. For us is to have a middle way between hedonic happiness and between this kind of inner cultivation and understanding that there's joy and contentment and happiness in both. And we want the best of both worlds. So uh, how can I go out to lunch with a good friend? But can I go sit in meditation? Can I go on retreat? Can I support my Buddhist communities and my Buddhist teachers? There's actually a way in which the practice can really come alive for folks like us. But we have to be careful. And I've done it, and I can tell you it was not fun, and I didn't enjoy it. But be you can kind of, I wish I had the sutta in front of me because it's such a good one. There's a sutta called the snake, where the Buddha talks about practicing the Dharma like handling a poisonous snake. And that if you grab the snake wrong, if you handle the snake incorrectly, it will bite you and kill you. And so what he's getting at is you can use Dharma practice, Dharma ideas, Dharma techniques in a way that's not their intended purpose, in ways that are quite destructive. And one of the ones that I find is that we can get on a Buddhist high horse where we start to think we shouldn't want anything, or we shouldn't have any desire. We should actually have not even craving. We should have the whole desire thing. We should just chop that right off. And what the problem with that, besides many problems with that, is first of all, it's just not a, if you live in modern society, it's just not a really pleasant way to live, to just kind of make yourself do without these hedonic pleasures. But also one thing that I see happens for a lot of people that I think is really something to keep an eye on that's super destructive is by adopting this position that I shouldn't want anything or I don't need anything can really tap into whatever feelings we might have of unworthiness. So like I'm not even worth having anything. I'm not even good enough to want anything anyway. And so what happens is this can kind of really trigger this destructive feedback loop where we're not really operating under the assumption that I don't really want anything because I don't want to crave and cling and contribute to whatever. But it's more like, oh, I actually don't believe I deserve it anyway. And now I have even another excuse to not want to participate in anything. So you got to kind of you watch this stuff because I've seen it in myself. I've seen it in some of the people that I work with. And so it's just an interesting way of practicing, understanding that you should be able to do both. You should be able to go out and have lunch with a friend and go out and enjoy that, but you should be able to go sit on a 7-day retreat and be totally content with the sleeping conditions and the food. And you want to be able to do both of those things because that hedonic pleasure, hedonic happiness is a lot of time what fuels our sense of purpose. We feel engaged in the world. We feel like we're contributing. We feel deserving of the pleasures of the world. It really makes us kind of feel better about things. It really helps us with our authenticity. And then working through these kinds of experiences. We so what's the escape then? So what's the way out? So again, it's trying to find a middle way between these two. And really, probably no surprise that the kind of middle way, when he talks about the escape, he actually goes on in the sutra to talk about the cultivation of the Eightfold Path is how we do that, which kind of makes a lot of sense. That's kind of, if you were to sit down with the Buddha, and ask him, hey man, I like seen you speak a couple times. I've been to some of your classes. I really like what you have to say. I listen to some of your podcasts. I'm really into what you have to say. What should I do? He would tell you to cultivate the Eightfold Path. There's no really argument to be made against that. Although ironically, and I'll stay off of this, but I just want to highlight it because I find it interesting. I have a bunch of books on my shelf here. There's not that many books on the Eightfold Path. There's really not. Like 50 books a month come out on mindfulness. But like there's the Bhikkhu Bodhi, the little Bhikkhu Bodhi book, Eightfold Path book, which is a great book. And Gregory Kramer, just to make a plug for Gregory Kramer, if you're not familiar with him, he's a fabulous Dharma teacher who doesn't get the attention he deserves. He wrote a book called Insight Dialogue, but he has another book called Whole Life Path, which is about the Eightfold Path, which is an unbelievably wonderful book. But it's interesting that this is the one thing the man was like, do this, and nobody seems interested in like writing about it. And so when we look at those, um, this also is talked about in various secular circles, so it's kind of a nice package, and I'll kind of end with this and we'll have some discussion. Without getting into the eight, let's just look at the three. The Eightfold Path, there's kind of three trainings, ethics. We train in ethics, we train in cultivating the mind, and we train in wisdom. And so there's actually happiness to be had in all three of these. And so there's the happiness that comes from just kind of being a good person. There's happiness, and this really again plays into the existentialist's thoughts on um, authenticity. And I would say to live with authenticity is really to live with sila, which is translated as kind of ethics or integrity, which kind of sits somewhere between morality and ethics. But really, it's to live in integrity, but it's by your integrity. It's not by somebody else's standards. I know that we have, the five precepts and all these different things, and I have no problem with any of those things. But I think, and this is kind of well researched in cognitive science research, that really the metric for happiness of living in integrity or living an ethical life is when you are living in alignment with your values, right? So if my value is honesty, if I'm living in line with my honesty, I feel happy. And when I'm dishonest, I actually don't feel that happy. I feel kind of regretful. I feel upset. I feel inauthentic. Like for me, there's nothing that feels more inauthentic than just lying. Just like lying, and I've done it before. I'm sure you lying on purpose just to avoid some conflict with somebody. You kind of walk away feeling like, I think I could have handled that better, right? So really, that's kind of that metric and there's a lot of happiness. You might notice when you feel good and when you feel happy and you feel content. A lot of times, it's because I'm really liking how I'm living. I'm living in line with my values. And so the other thing we want to remember is the authentic thing is this is very subjective. It's not about giving ourselves over to the values or the rules of society. That's again an inauthentic move. But your values. Now, all of us here, we're all practitioners. I'm sure we all share many, many values: kindness, generosity, wisdom. But you probably have some values that are actually really important to you, that are specific to your makeup and your disposition, and you kind of know those. If we want to know what those are, we want to own those. And there's a lot of happiness to be had by doing this. And so that's just the first camp of it. So we really can utilize the Buddhist teachings on sila, on the way we use our voice through communication, the way that we live, the way that we work, our behaviors, and then how we make money. Like there's a lot that goes on there. So that's a huge, we could do a whole day on, we could do a whole session on that. I think I've done it for you guys in the past, actually. These path factors: right speech, right action, right livelihood, right? Big part of our life. So there's happiness to be had there. So go get some. Um, Also, the happiness that comes from training the mind, the developing mind. And one thing the Buddha is definitely clear about, I think, without too much argument, is that if you have a mind and you want to be happy, you're going to have to train it. You just are. Like this thing is in and of itself is like going to the local rescue and like rescuing like a 3-year-old pit bull. It's like the thing's out of control. Let's just be honest here. Like the untrained mind, I mean, even the trained mind is kind of like, woo. But so we have to train this thing. And that's really what, effort, mindfulness, concentration, mindfulness, insight, vipassana, all of the stuff that we do is really all about training the mind, so that way and there's happiness that comes in a mind that's trained. And that quality of contentment is something that we can develop. There's 7 awakening factors. There's a whole taxonomy of terms. In the Abhidharma, there's 26 different terms for mental states, mental qualities that the Buddha says you want to develop these. And of course, the first one in the Abhidharma list and in the 7 factors awakening list is no surprise, is mindfulness. That means we have to have some kind of awareness. So cultivating mindfulness is, of course, you're never going to get to the end of that. You're never going to need to put that down. You're never going to have too much of that. So, there's a lot of happiness that comes in developing the mind, not just the ability to pay attention or to be aware, but also the ethical side of the mind, the authenticity of like, I kind of like who I am. Am I perfect? No. Do I make mistakes all the time? Sure, I do. Are there some things I wish I did better? Yeah. Am I perfect? Hell no. Am I ever going to be perfect? No. That's fine. Right. But you know what? When you close your eyes, do you actually, to some degree, enjoy the company that you keep? I hope so. And that's happiness that comes in that. And of course, the last one, which sometimes gets put first, I think is not necessarily the best move, is the happiness that comes from having wisdom. So, what is wisdom? This word that we hear, like, what is wisdom really? And so that is a lot of ways to think about it, but really in many ways it's just simply put, wisdom is about understanding the limitations of your experience and also understanding what's possible. And a lot of times we get that wrong. We try to do things that are impossible, and we get upset that we can't pull it off, because we don't have the wisdom to see like that's not going to happen, dude. Like you're totally barking up the wrong tree. And and understanding, well, what's possible and actually doing what's possible and putting aside where we're limited. And so that's, again, a lot of times coming back to, in many ways, I think where a lot of things overlap, whether it's recovery or psychotherapy or Dharma practice, really boils down to where I began, which is like having to embrace, all the shit we've been through, you know all the difficult experiences we've had, and just really, you know coming into some degree of kindness and acceptance of, this is this is my location in the world. This is who I am. This is what I can do. And there's happiness from that comes from being able to make, and a lot of it comes down to choices, right? Being able to make good choices for ourselves. You know, good choices, oftentimes hard choices, because again, in Kierkegaard's explanation, he says, that if we live a life, if we let others decide our lives for us, we live a life that is bereft of joy, contentment, meaning, and purpose. And of course, if you grew up in the world like we all did, I mean, there's a lot of people telling you how to live, you know, and that's part of the struggle that we're in. If people say you should do this and you shouldn't do that, and you should go to school and you should do this, and we live in a world that's always obviously telling us what to do much of the time, what to do, not what to do, but even now what to think and what to believe and who to trust. It's kind of a mess. But when we give ourselves over to that, we're living out of alignment with our values, with our sense of meaning, with our sense of purpose. So we really want to take this all back. And I think really what the Buddha was saying right at the outset was just, it's a very rebellious move, the move of the rebel saint, to say, I'm going to do what I think is right, regardless of how it might play out. So those are some words on authentic happiness, genuine happiness. I'm going to stop there. We have maybe 20 minutes or so for questions. I'm happy to answer any questions you have, but I'd also be curious to hear what your experience is with some of this stuff. I'm sure I would imagine you're all familiar with most of what I've had to say. And so I think you can, if you go down to reactions, there's a little magic hand you can put up, or you might be able to raise your hand and me and George can see it. But I'd love to hear anything you want to ask or say while we have a little bit of time together. So thank you for your kind attention. Yeah, Victoria, please.
Yeah, I'm so glad I got to hear this talk. Fabulous as always. Thanks to the time change. I was supposed to be virtually at Gaia House, but they haven't changed the time, thankfully. Anyway, it's just wonderful to like hear it like it is. That's what I really appreciate about you. And I didn't realize you worked with Eve. I guess I don't know much about you, but she's fabulous too. I was kind of intrigued because I was thinking of my well, I'm in the Christian tradition and it's Lent, so that's like this is a perfect Lenten talk, actually.
Cool.
But they put in the Christian tradition, there are we know there's a story of Jesus tempted in the wilderness and the three temptations. And then later on, they're kind of summarized by St. Paul as the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. And I was thinking what an interesting parallel that is to the three sorry, now I lost my train of thought. You know what I'm saying, right?
The contentment, meaning, and purpose three?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Kind of is it kind of in thinking of like an antidote thing. And it was interesting what you said, that you often see what it is you're trying to learn by seeing the opposite. And which is another thing in like in theology of the apophatic versus the cataphatic. Like the apophatic is it's impossible to define God. And the only way to do it, then the only thing with integrity is to say what God isn't. And by like seeing what isn't God, you get a sense, because it's hubris to think you can actually like pin down the divine.
I
And
agree.
so I feel like that's what you're doing, which is great. I mean, that was kind of Kierkegaard's whole shtick. Anyway, I don't know what my question is,
That's
except
all
that
right.
I just wanted to like check in and say, fabulous as always. And I have a friend here who never ever listens to Dharma stuff. It's like
I have friends like that.
enough already. And no, but he came in here like 5 times and he said, "Who is this guy?" And he was laughing. I just want to put in a plug for, well, not put in a plug, but I think humor is so
Oh man, it's so
crucial in
important.
this. And that's what I think is so wonderful about your teaching, is this, and I've noticed that if that like the suttas are there's tons of humor in there if you give yourself permission to see it. I imagine the Buddha was actually really humorous. Anyway, I see a million people want to talk to you, so I'm going to go for now, but I just wanted to thank you and look forward to hearing you again soon. So thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Jane, and then Lorenzo and Steve.
I'm not on screen, but I guess uh can you get me on screen or no?
Well, I can see you.
Okay, good. I want to thank you. I'm a psychotherapist, and a lot of what you are saying today really resonates. So thank you. My thoughts are, oh, I have a lot of thoughts, but my question, I guess, my curiosity is if you could speak to, I find that the word resilience keeps coming up in my
Good word.
vocabulary. And I would say that contentment is like widening the window of tolerance
Totally.
and really finding ways of resilience within yourself. And so I just wondered what your thoughts about resilience are. The other thing I was curious about, if I can remember what I wanted to say, come on back, come back. Um, was I find it interesting that we have these kind of very black white definitions of things, and so for me, when I hear suffering, it seems like it's being exposed or discussed as a negative, and I see it
Totally.
as a positive. And
Well,
so
yeah, totally. I hear you.
I think for
I
me,
could talk about that for days. Yeah, definitely.
okay, but I just want to ask you, do you see suffer? I find I find a lot of contentment within the suffering.
Yeah. Well, suffering comes from this word dukkha, and to translate dukkha as suffering is just kind of a bad move, but whatever, we're stuck with it. We're not going to convince the Buddhists to get rid of the suffering word, and that's fine. But yeah, I think you're right about that. An interesting thing about it, just like historical or contextual, the Buddha doesn't speak of dukkha in a pejorative sense. He doesn't speak about it being, he just says it is. He's just like, yeah, there's this thing, And so we, of course, suffering in the English, nobody's going to think that's a good word. But I think that whatever you feel about it, however you feel about it, is irrelevant. The fact of the matter is, what are you going to do about it? And so
Embrace it.
that's what the Buddha's after. He's like, what are you going to do about it? And here's some suggestions. And so resilience, though, that's a good word. I think by and large, the Dharma practice, one of the first primary outcomes is you become more resilient. And clinically speaking, resilience is just, how long does it take me to recover from a perceived setback? And like something happened, some setback, and I got 4 or 5 scheduled tomorrow, probably. I don't know what they are, but I'm sure they're waiting for me. And so, how long resilience is by and large, it's difficult because it's all about it's all about a struggle. And so trying to avoid things isn't resilience, it's aversive. That doesn't work. So again, we something happens, I have a perceived setback, and how long does it take me to recover from that window, right? That timeline, the intensity, the duration of those things, I'm able to do it quicker. And I've noticed that I can definitely say that I recover quicker. It still happens frequently, and it's still often quite intense, but it doesn't last that long. And that's really what we're trying to mitigate, is the duration of the suffering episode. Yeah. So great stuff. I appreciate it. Lorenzo and Steve, I feel like I know you guys.
You've been a special guest at our Recovery Dharma meetings before.
Okay. Is that
So
Steve
yeah,
Whitten?
yeah,
Oh, hey, Steve. Good to see you, man.
it is. Thanks for that. We're big fans of yours, of course. Thank you for the teachings. I just wanted to hop on and say, yeah, I appreciated how you mentioned pain as part of contentment and how it factors in.
Well, pain is
We're
part
both
of meaning, actually.
okay, meaning. Yeah, so like we're both facilitators. I was just thinking of, how much pain is in addiction recovery and in trauma, and through the
Oh, yeah.
Dharma, we're uncovering the heart. So just there's so much freaking pain, but I do feel content, and that the Dharma has helped me attain that. So I
Sure.
just think that's interesting how we balance it, because even bearing witness to like all this death, like that sucks. But I'm still
Totally.
more content than I was before. I don't know. That's
Sure.
just what came up for me, and I wanted to comment that. But thank you for the talk today.
No, your pain is important, it is. And of course, that's our biological move, is to be rid of it. Of course, like we should avoid pain, like duh, but like you can't do it, like it's like, and so you can get into like kind of all these, on some level, isn't addiction just about trying to avoid pain? Like that's a huge part of that equation. And like, it just doesn't work. It works for a little while, and so, I think that, and this is just my opinion, and I think this is actually well documented in the early discourses, but I think this declaring war against suffering and dukkha is a bad move. I think it's just like, I don't think we're trying to be, I don't think we're going to put it to an end. I don't think that's the game here. I think it's to embrace that. And that's what people in recovery do, right? They embrace the pain of their lives, and then their lives get way better. They're like the ultimate example, like there's not a better example in society of embracing dukkha and having a meaningful life than people who have been through the recovery process. That's the greatest story ever told, And so I respect what you guys are doing. I don't do as much of it as I used to, but it's a messy world, man. It's like you work in a paint store, you're gonna get paint on your clothes every day, and so you got to take care of yourself when you're in that space, because addiction is the paint store.
Awesome. Appreciate that.
Yeah, man, definitely. Good, keep it up.
Dave, there's a question in the chat.
Okay, cool.
I'm going to read it. Josephine, she says, thanks. This was great. wondering what you think about the emphasis on joy and gratitude in many mindfulness platforms. I found your approach more tempered and therefore refreshing, if I heard right.
Yeah, good question. I mean, I tried to avoid joy for a long, long time. I don't recommend it. I honestly just was scared of it. I mean, like that, if I'm just honest, like the idea of joy, I was like, I don't want any of that because if I'm going to get it and then it's going to get taken away, I'm going to be suffering again. You know, like I was scared to death of joy. Joy and gratitude, I think it's really important. I think actually the Brahma Vihara Mudita, which is, I think, kind of sloppily translated as sympathetic joy, is really about joy and gratitude. It's like, it's about enjoying that which is enjoyable. It's about participating in the hedonic happiness. It's about being grateful for the fact that you can afford HBO Max now and you can watch these shows you want to watch. It's like a lot of the stuff that we kind of poo-poo. It's like, you know, going out and being able to go out and have lunch with a friend, or being able to just, you know, being able to participate. There's a lot of joy and gratitude in that. It's not just mystical. You know, I think when joy and gratitude gets kind of parked in the camp of mysticism, it's not that, but there's a lot of joy and gratitude is scattered everywhere. It's all over the place. And so, you know, we have to kind of train ourselves to notice that, you know, to take a walk in nature, or to do something that's enjoyable on a very, very small scale, to realize there's a lot more to be grateful for than we might realize. Now, of course, if you watch the news or you look at any of the stuff that's going on your screen, the world, that which is really out there, there's not a lot of joy and gratitude. You know, I haven't seen that news segment ever, you know, and so we got to be careful. You know, it's dangerous, right? We have to be careful. But I think I actually like, because, you know, compassion kind of what, you know, because the Christian's Neff's work in mindful self-compassion, which I'm all a fan of that stuff. But again, it's like, where's the mindful self-gratitude course? You know, like we need that one now, because I think that, and that's probably part of it. I haven't seen it all, but I think that the gratitude piece, and, you know, just again, if you look at secular research on happiness, in every one that I haven't seen them all, of course, but I did work on this for a while. In such a huge segment of happiness research, the key ingredient always that comes up is gratitude. You know, and so I think that that's just something we have to think about, we have to consider, we have to work for. We really have to put the effort in on gratitude, because it just feels so good. Thank you for that question. Are there other questions in the chat? I can look at them too.
Yeah, just to let you know, I did the mindful self-compassion teacher training, and there's a big chunk of gratitude, and
Well, that's good to hear. I would imagine that would be the case, but that's good to hear.
It's quite an interesting program to do.
Yeah. Awesome.
Okay, I think Victoria just added this, and maybe you could just could resilience perhaps be an aspect of right effort?
Oh, I think definitely. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think right effort, the four great efforts is almost the metrics of resilience, you know, to prevent destructive forces from arising in the mind, to overcome them when they do, you know. Yeah. So I think really when you go from effort number 2 to effort number 3, the overcoming and the development, when you accomplish that task, I think that's a really good question. That's a good catch on that. I think that is, in my mind, the metric of resilience. I think you're on mute, George.
Sorry about that. Josephine is just thanking you for the insightful answer. And there's a couple of comments. Thank you for the guided meditation from Nita, and the talk with a sense of humor. Talking about sneakers makes the teachings more lively.
I mean, who doesn't love a new pair of sneakers? I do.
Yeah, I agree.
Come on. They're great. Sorry, they're great. You know. But be careful. They're dangerous too. They're expensive. You know, you got to be careful with this stuff.
Okay. So
oh yeah, Suzanne, please.
Hi, I have a question from the guided practice. You had us put our attention from the chin sort of down a line to the belly button. And I know, you know, vagal nerve, whatever, but I'd really love to hear from you why you direct attention there and what's behind that in actually the experiential meditation piece of this.
Well, you're correct. Good catch. That's all based on polyvagal theory. So the chin to belly, and especially the neck and the throat area, like, tension, resistance, tightness. This chin to belly button area, man, there's a lot going on right there. And a lot of times, one of the things that I noticed is when I was starting to learn polyvagal theory, I started doing some metta practices that kind of did that. And not to try to get people upset, but I noticed when I was doing it for a long time, when I was working in addiction, and I noticed it would really foster a lot of tears. And so I noticed that there's something very vulnerable. There's something very also to not just, there's also, that's where the emotional stuff really, really sits. So just by turning to that part of the body and trying to loosen it or soften it or find something good there, is just kind of an efficient way to get at the heart or get at the emotional experience. So I almost always use that when I do anything that has a Brahma Vihara sense to it or something around kind of the stuff we gathered today. I think that that's really, and a lot of people will notice, and I've heard a lot of people say this, they say, when you did that, the first thing I noticed was how tight my neck was. Their throat. And if you think about it too, if you ever tried to keep yourself from crying, it feels like somebody's choking you to death, man. Like it takes a lot of work to repress sadness at the throat. So I think that it's a great instruction. I think it loosens things up a little bit. Did you have an initial reaction to it that was noticeable?
It just felt really good. And there was as if my body was saying, oh, yes, thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've done a little somatic experiencing training, and I just wanted to hear you talk about that. So thank you.
Yeah, no, it's great. I think it's good. It's a good thing. You have to be a little bit careful, but most people, it's not a huge request.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Good to see you. Yeah, and he put it in there. Thank you, George. I am at davesmithdharma.com. And if you want to reach out to me, please do so. If you want to talk or ask more about what I've said, I have a podcast called davesmithdharma.com. I think I have 2 or 3 talks. Actually, Suzanne, who's in Montana, I think I gave one of those talks at her retreat last year. I have a couple talks on this theme, and I have maybe 300 episodes. So I have tons of free stuff out there. If you want to check out more, please do so. And I think we are about there, so I want to respect people's time. I'm looking out my window and I have my children are running up and down the driveway, so I want to go see what's going on out there. And yeah, so thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sangha Live. I always appreciate you guys inviting me back. I love the work that you do. I have an online course with you guys, and I'm good friends with Martin, although I haven't seen him in a long time. So much love to Martin and all the Sangha Live crew for everything that you guys do. You guys really hold down a really important Dharma space every Sunday, and I appreciate it. I know how much work it is, and you guys always give us such great stuff. So no surprise to see this many people. This is always the largest group I do, so keep it up.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you for your
Metta to Dave. And metta
Peace
to
and
everyone.
gratitude. Thank you.
And
Take
see
care.
you.
Dave.
See you soon.